Tibetan history, as it has been recorded, is particularly focused on the history of Buddhism in Tibet. This is partly due to the pivotal role this religion has played in the development of Tibetan and Mongol cultures, and partly because almost all native historians of the country were Buddhist monks. Geographical setting: Tibet lies between the core areas of the ancient civilizations of China and of India. Extensive mountain ranges to the east of the Tibetan Plateau mark the border with China, and the towering Himalayas of Nepal and India form a barrier between Tibet and India. Tibet is nicknamed the roof of the world, or the land of snows. Linguists classify the Tibetan language and its dialects as belonging to the Tibeto-Burman languages, the non-Sinitic members of the Sino-Tibetan language family. Prehistory: some archaeological data suggests archaic humans may have passed through Tibet at the time India was first inhabited, 500,000 years ago. Modern humans first inhabited the Tibetan Plateau at least 21,000 years ago. This population was largely replaced around 3000 BC by Neolithic immigrants from northern China. However, there is a partial genetic continuity between the Paleolithic inhabitants and the contemporary Tibetan populations. Megalithic monuments dot the Tibetan Plateau and may have been used in ancestor worship. Prehistoric Iron Age hill forts and burial complexes have recently been found on the Tibetan Plateau, but the remote high-altitude location makes archaeological research difficult. Zhangjung Kingdom. According to Namhai Norba, some Tibetan historical texts identify the Zhangjung culture as a people who migrated from the Amda region into what is now the region of Guja in western Tibet. Zhangjung is considered to be the original home of the Bon religion. By the 1st century BC, a neighboring kingdom arose in the Yarlung Valley, and the Yarlung king, Drigum Zenpo, attempted to remove the influence of the Zhangjung by expelling the Zhang's Bon priests from Yarlung. He was assassinated, and Zhangjung continued its dominance of the region until it was annexed by Songtsen Gampo in the 7th century. In AD 108, the Kayang or Tibetans, who were then entirely savage and lived a nomadic life west and south of the Koko-Nor, attacked the Chinese post of Kansu, threatening to cut the Tunhuang Road. Liang Kayan, at the price of some fierce fighting, held them off. Similar incursions were repelled in AD 168 to 169 by the Chinese general Tuan Kung. Mythological origins: the dates attributed to the first Tibetan king, Nyatri Zenpo, vary. Some Tibetan texts give 126 BC, others 414 BC. Nyatri Zenpo is said to have descended from a one-footed creature called the Rang, having webbed fingers and a tongue so large it could cover his face. Due to his terrifying appearance, he was feared in his native Puwo and exiled by the Bon to Tibet. There he was greeted as a fearsome being, and he became king. The Tibetan kings were said to remain connected to the heavens via a DMU cord, so that rather than dying, they ascended directly to heaven when their sons achieved their majority. According to various accounts, King Drigum Zenpo either challenged his clan heads to a fight, or provoked his groom Longnam into a duel. During the fight the king's DMU cord was cut, and he was killed. Thereafter Drigum Zenpo and subsequent kings left corpses, and the Bon conducted funerary rites. In a later myth, first attested in the Mani Bka Bum, the Tibetan people are the progeny of the union of the monkey Pha Trilgan Changchup Semper and rock ogres Ma Drag Sinmo. But the monkey was a manifestation of the Bodhisattva Chenrezig, or Avalokite's Vera, while the ogress in turn incarnated Chenrezig's consort Dolma. Yarlung dynasty. From the 7th century AD, Chinese historians refer to Tibet as Tubo, though 4 distinct characters were used. The first externally confirmed contact with the Tibetan kingdom in recorded Tibetan history occurred when King Namri Longsan sent an ambassador to China in the early 7th century. Tibetan Empire. The power that became the Tibetan state originated when a group convinced Tagbu Snyag's Tagbu Nyazug to rebel against Dgugri Zingpo Rje Gudri Zingpolya, who was in turn a vassal of the Zhangzhung Empire under the Lig-Myi dynasty. The group prevailed against Zingpo Rje. At this point Namri Songtsen was the leader of a clan which prevailed over all his neighboring clans, one by one, and he gained control of all the area around what is now Lhasa by 630, when he was assassinated. This newborn regional state would later become known as the Tibetan Empire. The government of Namri Songtsen sent 2 embassies to China in 608 and 609, marking the appearance of Tibet on the international scene. Traditional Tibetan history preserves a lengthy list of rulers whose exploits become subject to external verification in the Chinese histories by the 7th century. From the 7th to the 11th century a series of emperors ruled Tibet. See List of emperors of Tibet, of whom the 3 most important in later religious tradition were Songtsen Gampo, Trisong Zen and Ralpakan, the 3 religious kings, who were assimilated to the 3 protectors, respectively Avalokitesvara, Manjusri and Vajrapana. Throughout the centuries from the time of the emperor, the power of the empire gradually increased over a diverse terrain so that by the reign of the emperor in the opening years of the 9th century, its influence extended as far south as Bengal and as far north as Mongolia. The varied terrain of the empire and the difficulty of transportation, coupled with the new ideas that came into the empire as a result of its expansion, helped to create stresses and power blocks that were often in competition with the ruler at the center of the empire. Thus, for example, adherents of the Bon religion and the supporters of the ancient noble families gradually came to find themselves in competition with the recently introduced Buddhism. Era of fragmentation. The era of fragmentation is a period of Tibetan history between the 9th and 11th centuries. During this era, the political centralization of the earlier Tibetan Empire collapsed. The period was dominated by rebellions against the remnants of imperial Tibet and the rise of regional warlords. Upon the death of Langdarma, the last emperor of a unified Tibetan empire, there was a controversy over whether he would be succeeded by his alleged heir Yumtan, or by another son Osung. A civil war ensued, which effectively ended centralized Tibetan administration until the Sarskaya period. Osung's allies managed to keep control of Lhasa, and Yumtan was forced to go to Yalung, where he established a separate line of kings. In 910 the tombs of the emperors were defiled. The son of Osung was Palkort San. The latter apparently maintained control over much of central Tibet for a time, and sired 2 sons, Trashi Zent-san and Thriki-Iding, also called Khyada Nyagon in some sources. Thriki-Iding migrated to the western Tibetan region of Upper Nari and married a woman of high central Tibetan nobility, with whom he founded a local dynasty. After the breakup of the Tibetan Empire in 842, Nyama Gon, a representative of the ancient Tibetan royal house, founded the first Ladakh dynasty. Nyama Gon's kingdom had its center well to the east of present-day Ladakh. Khyada Nyagin's eldest son became ruler of the Mayel Ladakh region, and his 2 younger sons ruled western Tibet, founding the kingdom of Guja and Purang. At a later period the king of Guja's eldest son, Kori, also called Jangchub Yesharo, became a Buddhist monk. He sent young scholars to Kashmir for training and was responsible for inviting Atiza to Tibet in 1040, thus ushering in the Chida phase of Buddhism in Tibet. The younger son, Strong Ng, administered day-to-day governmental affairs. It was his sons who carried on the royal line. Central rule was largely non-existent over the Tibetan region from 842 to 1247. According to traditional accounts, Buddhism had survived surreptitiously in the region of Kham. During the reign of Langdarma 3 monks had escaped from the troubled region of Lhasa to the region of Mount Dantigananda. Their disciple Muzu Sai-el-Ba, later known as the scholar Gongpa Rabsal, was responsible for the renewal of Buddhism in northeastern Tibet, and is counted as the progenitor of the Nyingma school of Tibetan Buddhism. Meanwhile, according to tradition, one of Osung's descendants, who had an estate near Samai, sent 10 young men to be trained by Gongpa Rabsal. Among the 10 was Lum Sherab Shulthram. Once trained, these young men were ordained to go back into the central Tibetan regions of Yuan Sang. The young scholars were able to link up with the Tsa shortly after 1042 and advance the spread and organization of Buddhism in Lhokha. In that region, the faith eventually coalesced again, with the foundation of the Sakya monastery in 1073. Over the next 2 centuries, the Sakya monastery grew to a position of prominence in Tibetan life and culture. The Serfu monastery, home of the Karmapa school of Buddhism, was founded in 1155. Mongol conquest and Yuan administrative rule. During this era, the region was dominated by the Sakya Lama with the Mongols' support, so it is also called the Sakya dynasty. The first documented contact between the Tibetans and the Mongols occurred when the missionary Sangpa Dunkur and 6 disciples met Genghis Khan, probably on the Tangut border where he may have been taken captive, around 1221–2. He left Mongolia as the Quanzhen sect of Daoism gained the upper hand, but re-met Genghis Khan when Mongols conquered Tangut shortly before the Khan's death. Closer contacts ensued when the Mongols successively sought to move through the Sino-Tibetan borderlands to attack the Jin dynasty and then the southern Song, with incursions on outlying areas. One traditional Tibetan account claims that there was a plot to invade Tibet by Genghis Khan in 1206, which is considered anachronistic. There is no evidence of Mongol-Tibetan encounters prior to the military campaign in 1240. The mistake may have arisen from Genghis' real campaign against the Tangut Xixia. The Mongols invaded Tibet in 1240, with a small campaign led by the Mongol general Dodar Darkhan, that consisted of 30,000 troops, resulting in 500 casualties. The Mongols withdrew their soldiers from Tibet in 1241, as all the Mongol princes were recalled back to Mongolia in preparation for the appointment of a successor to Ogedei Khan. They returned to the region in 1244, when Khoten delivered an ultimatum, summoning the abbot of Sakya to be his personal chaplain, on pains of a larger invasion were he to refuse. Sakya Pandita took almost 3 years to obey the summons and arrive in Kokona in 1246, and met Prince Khoten in Lanzhou the following year. The Mongols had annexed Amduran Kham to the east, and appointed Sakya Pandita viceroy of central Tibet by the Mongol court in 1249. Tibet was incorporated into the Mongol Empire, retaining nominal power over religious and regional political affairs, while the Mongols managed a structural and administrative rule over the region, reinforced by the rare military intervention. This existed as a diarchic structure, under the Yuan emperor, with power primarily in favor of the Mongols. Within the branch of the Mongol Empire in China known as the Yuan dynasty, Tibet was managed by the Bureau of Buddhist and Tibetan Affairs or Shanzheng Yuan, separate from other Yuan provinces such as those governed the former Song dynasty China. One of the department's purposes was to select of Dpon Chen, usually appointed by the Lama and confirmed by the Mongol emperor in Beijing. The Mongol dominance was most indirect. Sakya Lamas remained the sources of authority and legitimacy, while the Dpon Chens carried on the administration at Sakya. However, there was no doubt as to who had the political clout. When a dispute developed between Dpon Chen Kung Dga Buripo and one of Phagspa's relatives at Sakya, the Chinese troops were dispatched to execute the Dpon Chen. In 1253, Drogon Chogyal Phagpa succeeded Sakya Pandita at the Mongol court. Phagpa became a religious teacher to Kublai Khan. Kublai Khan appointed Chogyal Phagpa as his imperial preceptor in 1260, the year when he became Khagan. Phagpa developed the priest-patron concept that characterized Tibeto-Mongolian relations from that point forward. With the support of Kublai Khan, Phagpa established himself and his sect as the preeminent political power in Tibet. Through their influence with the Mongol rulers, Tibetan lamas gained considerable influence in various Mongol clans, not only with Kublai, but, for example, also with the Ilkhanids. In 1265 Chogyal Phagpa returned to Tibet, and for the first time made an attempt to impose Sakya hegemony with the appointment of Sheikh Yabang Powaz, the Dpon Chen, over Tibet in 1267. A census was conducted in 1268 and Tibet was divided into 13 myriarchies. By the end of the century, a western Tibet lay under the effective control of imperial officials dependent on the Great Administrator, while the kingdoms of Gujar and Puran retained their internal autonomy. The Sakya hegemony over Tibet continued into the middle of the 14th century, although it was challenged by a revolt of the Drikung Kagyu sect with the assistance of Duwa Khan of the Chagatai Khanate in 1285. The revolt was suppressed in 1290, where the Sakyas and Eastern Mongols burned Drikung Monastery and killed 10,000 people. Between 1346 and 1354, towards the end of the Yuan dynasty, the House of Pagmodru would topple the Sakya. The rule over Tibet by a succession of Sakya lamas came to a definite end in 1358, when central Tibet came under control of the Kagyu sect. By the 1370s the lines between the schools of Buddhism were clear. The following 80 years or so were a period of relative stability. They also saw the birth of the Gelugpa school by the disciples of Tsongkhapa Lobsang Dragpa, and the founding of the Ganden, Drepung, and Sira monasteries near Lhasa. After the 1430s, the country entered another period of internal power struggles. Rise of Phagmodrapa, Rinpungpa and Sangpa. The Phagmodru myriarchy centered at New Dong was granted as an appanage to Hulegu in 1251. The area had already been associated with the Lang family, and with the waning of Ilkhanate influence it was ruled by this family. Within the Mongol Sakya framework headed by the Mongol-appointed Ponchen at Sakya, the areas under Lang administration were continually encroached upon during the late 13th and early 14th centuries. Jangchub Gyaltsen saw these encroachments as illegal and sought the restoration of Phagmodru lands after his appointment as the myriarch in 1322. After prolonged legal struggles, the struggle became violent when Phagmodru was attacked by its neighbors in 1346. Jangchub Gyaltsen was arrested and released in 1347. When he later refused to appear for trial, his domains were attacked by the Ponchen in 1348. Janchung Gyaltsen was able to defend Phagmodru, and continued to have military successes, until by 1351 he was the strongest political figure in the country. Military hostilities ended in 1354 with Jangchub Gyaltsen as the unquestioned victor, who established the Phagmodrapa dynasty in that year. He continued to rule central Tibet until his death in 1364, although he left all Mongol institutions in place as hollow formalities. The rule of Jangchub Gyaltsen and his successors implied a new cultural self-awareness where models were sought in the age of the ancient Tibetan kingdom. The relatively peaceful conditions favored the literary and artistic development. During this period the reformist scholar Tsongkhapa founded the Gelug sect, which would have a decisive influence on Tibet's history. Power remained in the hands of the Phagmodru family until 1434. After that, internal strife within the dynasty and the strong localism of the various fiefs and political religious factions led to a long series of internal conflicts. The minister family Rinpungpa, based in Sang, dominated politics after 1435. In 1565 they were overthrown by the Sangpa dynasty of Shigatse, which expanded its power in different directions of Tibet in the following decades, and favored the Karma Kagyu sect. In spite of the weakening of central authority, the neighboring Ming dynasty of China made no efforts to impose direct rule. Although it kept friendly relations with some of the lamas, Tibet would be independent from the mid-14th century on, for nearly 400 years.